In a democratic society, we're used to the idea that we have a parliament where people represent the citizens and decide on what is meaningful, what is right, and what is wrong. A parliament, above all, is the place where laws are made, where we say it is lawful to do this, it is not lawful to do that. And parliaments change what is lawful. So that, for instance, until 1967 in Britain, it was unlawful for men to have sex with other men. And Parliament changed that law. Now, Parliaments work fine about all the kinds of things that it is possible to talk about, that it's possible to put into words, that it's possible to argue about, that it's possible to explain. What they don't work well with is all of the things that we can't put into words, all of the things that we hope, all of the things that we're afraid of, all of the things that we would like to be possible, but we don't even know how to express. And that's what our culture does, and specifically what our art does for us. It opens up a debate, not a literal debate, but a kind of dialogue, a continual dialogue about what we think is happening to ourselves, what is meaningful, what is the value of our lives. This image is an image from the film of the Cormac McCarthy book, The Road. And it's just one of any number of films I could have shown you to illustrate the ways in which art and culture creates a dialogue, creates a conversation that is, in many ways, a political dialogue, but it's not happening in a political framework. So, at the same time as politicians are meeting in Copenhagen to try and decide on action about climate change, their constituents are going to the cinema to watch The Road. And one of the things about The Road is that you are never told what has happened. You are never told that this is a post-climate change scenario. You don't know what's happening. And one of the most important things about art, why it's such an important counterbalance to the rational debate that can happen in a parliament, is that it is ambiguous. It happens, it talks to us not only in verbal terms, not only in rational terms, it talks to us in feeling, it talks to us in metaphor, it talks to us in symbols. And it's always deniable. So, to take a different example, Shostakovich continues to be a composer whose legacy and meaning is controversial. Some people argue that he's a composer who submitted to Soviet totalitarianism. Other people will argue that he's a composer who subverted Soviet totalitarianism. It is impossible to say, but what's really important is that during his life and subsequently, around his work and through his work, people are able to have exactly that kind of debate and discussion and to reach their own sense of the meaning of Shostakovich and his work. And that is true of any great artist you can think of. And it will be true in years to come, I think, about Cormac McCarthy. So if I'm right, if what I call the Parliament of Dreams is the cultural life of a democracy, then it matters fundamentally who is able to take part in that cultural life. This is an Australian poet called Oodgeroo Noonuccal. She was the first Aboriginal poet to be published in Australia in the 1960s. At the time her first book was published, Aboriginal people did not have the vote. They were not citizens of Australia, although they made, at the time, something like 5% of the population. They weren't citizens. I personally have spoken to a nurse who, as a young woman, lived and worked in the outback in northern Queensland and knew people who had been involved in Aboriginal hunting, treating Aboriginal people like animals. The work of Oodgeroo was profoundly important in giving a voice to Aboriginal people and specifically to Aboriginal women. And not a political voice. There were other people who were giving a political voice, but giving a cultural voice, an artistic voice, a voice of sensibility, a voice that enabled people to understand what it was like to be Oodgeroo. When her work was first published, it was severely criticised by white, mostly male, literary critics as not being good poetry, because they had a very clear idea of what good poetry was. And good poetry was basically what white British poets had written in the 19th century. And if you didn't write like that, you weren't doing good work. So actually, what was essentially an essentially political debate was being conducted in aesthetic terms. Oodgeroo's work was being criticised for not being aesthetically acceptable to the mainstream literary establishment in Australia. This is all a long time ago, and much has changed since. And now Aboriginal rights have become much more part of the Australian Constitution, and Aboriginal art and poetry are an important part of the culture. And I don't mean to single out this particular instance as one as particularly notable. This is true in every country, in every civilization, in every society. There are people who are marginalized, and there are people who are dominant. There are people whose culture takes the center ground, whose culture is validated and legitimated, and there are people whose cultures are marginalized. And this is why, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 27 says, everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. I believe it doesn't say that because the arts are nice, or because being part of the cultural life of the community is an agreeable leisure activity. It is there because you cannot defend your other human rights unless you are able to define your cultural identity, to define what is meaningful and valuable to you in the public forum of the society that you are part of. In other words, if you are only going to be told what you are like, what you mean, what your validity is by others, you are not going to be able to enjoy your full human democratic rights.